Hello everybody, this is Kyle here from Inter Audio, and today I'm going to be going over just some of the basics of using Ableton Live. Just right from the get-go, just a standard version of Ableton. Just going to be going over the preferences first off, then the top bar here, everything that's in there, which is not a huge amount, but still good to know. The left bar, which is going to have a lot of information here. The bottom bar, arrangement view, and session view. So let's get started. So first off, we're gonna be looking at these guys as well as some preferences. So you've got options for opening sets, installing packs, managing files, all of that good stuff, exporting your audio and video. That's right here. Not a lot to say there. It's pretty standard. And most of the edit menu here can be completed with your default shortcut keys: Control Z, Control Y, Control C, Control V. The only exception to that that's going to be really important is cutting and pasting time. So if you use Control Shift X and Control Shift V, as well as Control Shift D, which is duplicate in Ableton, you can actually, rather than just copying one portion of track, you're copying, pasting, deleting, duplicating an entire portion of time within. So for instance, if you wanted to duplicate 4 bars, you would just highlight that on any one track and then hit Control Shift D. It would copy every single track that's in that selection. So that's a very good one to get jammed in your head. From there, you've got create. Again, these are just some shortcuts you're going to want to know. So Control I is going to be a quick and easy way to insert silence without having to move around all of your different tracks. Outside of that, Control T, Control Shift T are the only two that are super important. They're just going to be inserting an audio track if it's just Control T. Control Shift T is going to be your MIDI track. Same thing with clips. Control Shift M is your MIDI clip. Takes a minute to get those figured out, but you'll have it down pat in no time. Not a whole huge amount here that you'll ever really need to mess with, other than second window can be a pretty handy feature if you're rolling multi-monitor, because that'll give you a mixer on your other window. This is going to be the preferences. This is going to be where you're going to want to go for your initial setup. You're going to go in here, you'll start out on the look and feel. That all very straightforward. Just setting up your skin, your auto clip colors, and the behavior of your plugin windows. Then you've got audio. That's going to be the brunt of when you're going to be in this menu, is just to set up your driver. So for instance, right now I'm rolling in DirectX audio driver simply so I can capture the output from Ableton within OBS. So that's one way to do it. Not too much to go into there. You should hopefully already have a good foundation of what you're doing with all of this. Then from here, next tab, MIDI. That's going to be where you're setting up all your different MIDI devices. As you can see here, I've got my Machine Micro set up in here. But yeah, so you've got your control surface script. These are already set up within Ableton to map certain functions to your device. If your device isn't one that's supported by having native Ableton scripting, then in that case you can just hit none and select whatever device you want in here. You'll have to select the input and output anyway. It's just this automatically maps it. It's what makes launch pads work, essentially. And then a few extra options down here that you probably aren't going to have to mess with other than track sync and remote. And so moving on. File and folder, another super important place when you're going to first set things up. If you want to have a default set for when you open something as new, set everything up you want in your file and then just hit save as default right here. That means every time you open it up, it's going to be opening up the same set of things. As you can see, mine is a set of drum samples and then 3 instances of Serum. So pretty straightforward. You can also set up a sample editor. In my case, I've got Wavesaur. I never really use it, but it's there if you do a lot of sample editing. This is pretty important though. You definitely need to have your VST set to a custom folder. This is one of the weak points of Ableton's plugin management, in my opinion. You can only have one custom folder set up in here. So like I also mainline Reaper pretty hard. And with Reaper, you can set it to any amount of folders you want, which is really nice because things install in a variety of places. So before you get this all set up, you will need to consolidate all of your VSTs down to one folder, and you'll want to make sure all of them are the same bit depth. So they will all need to be 32 or 64 bit, depending on which version of Ableton you're running. Otherwise, you're just not going to see some of them if they're if you only have the 32 bit and you're running a 64 bit version of Ableton. So definitely get that set up. Let's see, outside of that, just a few housekeeping things in the library area. This is just going to be recording options for when you are recording live audio. So just bit depth, file type, and then exclusive arm and solo. Depending on what you're used to, you may want those on or off. It essentially is going to mean that when you click one, it's going to make it to, or when you solo or record arm one track, it's going to make sure that that's the only one that's record armed or soloed by itself. Otherwise, you'll have to go back and re-click the other one. So, also a good one to know. There's a very important setting in here that can be a real pain if you don't know that it exists. So it's going to be this auto warp long samples. Anybody that's worked in Ableton before and has not noticed that they left this on and has tried to import a large file, for instance like an acapella or something like that, has definitely discovered how incredibly frustrating this can be if this is turned on, because it's going to essentially try to figure out what BPM your sample is if it's a long one, and it's going to try to warp that to the BPM of your track, which if it's an acapella or anything that isn't a drum sample, it's probably not going to have a lot of success with, and you're going to end up with a very oddly warped sample that you can't get to sync up with any audio. So my recommendation is to turn that off. And outside of that, a lot of this has to do with launch. So if you have a launch pad, then definitely you'll want to look into that a little bit more. It's pretty straightforward. So if you have a launch pad, they have videos up on their channel for it to give you more information. You've got multi-core support. Always leave that on. That, I'm not sure why that's a toggle. That's just something that should be on. That's going to just give you the ability to use live on more cores than just one. So those are going to be your preferences. Now on to the top bar. So in our top bar, we'll go left to right. We've got external sync. That's going to be if you are linking Ableton with some other MIDI synced device, and you want the BPM of this instance of Ableton to be synced to that. You've got your tap BPM. That's straightforward. Just tap it, and that'll give you your BPM. You can manually adjust the BPM by sliding it up and down here. And then I believe, yeah, control will give you intervals of tenths. So pretty straightforward there. You can nudge it down, nudge it up. And then you can also change your time signature to whatever weird, funky time signature you want. This is your metronome button, which isn't super clearly labeled unless you look down here. But that turns your metronome on and off. You can also change your count-in length. For instance, people like me that use Machine, I love the 2-bar count-in. A lot of people like 4 or 1-bar though, so it's good that you're able to change that at least a little bit. And then this is your quantization. So that's going to be when you're launching something in session view, which we'll get to. So that's a good thing to change if you're using like a launch pad, or if you're launching clips manually, you'll want to have that set up. Let's see, moving on, we've got follow. So what this is going to do is if you are zoomed way in and you have that turned on, then Ableton will automatically follow your marker across, so you won't have to constantly be scrolling. So there's that. If you have that off, then it'll just keep going on its own. From there, we have got, this is just the arrangement position marker. You already know what that is though. We've got play, stop, record, and MIDI arrangement overdub, which means that whenever you're recording something, say if we have something right here, we'll record a quick bar of something. So if you have that off and you record, then what's going to happen is it's just going to completely override it. So there's nothing left there anymore. Now, if you have MIDI arrangement overdub enabled, then in that case, it's going to... So now your MIDI data is mixed between the two. So depending on what kind of arranging you're doing, that can be pretty helpful. Automation arm, that means if you change a setting while you have record going here, then it's going to automatically have that modulation performed inside of Ableton. So let me show you on Serum real quick. So if we set this to record and then I change the unison value, while we do that, now we have a new unison value. You can see that that changed whenever I changed it in there. And so if that's off, then it won't do that. Re-enable modulation, this is what happens if, or that's a button you need to click. It'll change color if you change a setting that otherwise is modulated. So for instance, if I crank that up to 16, now you can see this is grayed out, this modulation, and that is red, indicating that that's not a value that it previously was in tune with that modulation. So at this point, you can click that, it'll reset it. Otherwise, you will have to manually go back in and change all of that modulation mumbo jumbo. So that wraps up that little section. Now on to the right section. This is going to be your loop start stop, punch in, punch out point, all of that. So say you wanted to loop this section of an arrangement, you can hit Control L. That'll set your loop bracket to it. Or alternately, you can drag it because it's up here at the top. And so you can see it is changing up here. So the first number is the start point of your loop, and the second number is how long it is in musical notation. So that'll allow it to just keep looping through that section. Your punch in, punch out points essentially mean that you can hit record, say I wanted to record this 4 bars, but I wanted to play the portion leading up to it. I would have a punch in point there. It would start playing the stuff I've already input as MIDI here without overriding it, and then once it hit marker 5, it would begin recording. Then I could hit a punch out point at the end here. It would stop recording there and go back into whatever I've done. So really quick way to either insert something new that you can that you ad lib, or to completely just overdub just a specific portion of a track. So there's that. Next, you've got draw mode, which the shortcut for this is B. So that's going to allow you to draw in modulation, which can be pretty handy dandy. Then you've got the computer MIDI keyboard. This is for those of you that don't have a keyboard that you can use. So you can just go in, you can tap your computer keyboard and it'll act as your MIDI keyboard. And another fun thing that you can do is this is key map mode switch, which is a long way of saying click this to be able to actually change what everything in Ableton is mapped to. So this is also a really good thing to have set to your default, because otherwise you do have to go in and remap this for every single project file. So for instance, because I'm used to Reaper, I'm used to the W key being my stop key and my rewind key. So I have it mapped to the stop button, so I can just double tap W to go back to the beginning. But you can map anything that turns orange when you click this button. You can map that to a keyboard key. If you do have a physical keyboard, I would just make sure that your keyboard key section here is turned off. Have that set up, map it to a few different things. It's super handy, even if it's only a handful. Then you've got your MIDI map mode, which is the exact same thing as key, but with MIDI options. So if you have one of the keyboards or devices that I was talking about previously, where it is auto mapped. So for instance, like I have an Akai MPK Mini over here on my left side. So I can go in here, configure Serum. We'll just add a few other knobs for funsies. So I've got 8 knobs on the MPK Mini for those of you that aren't super familiar with it. And so what it does with those that are auto mapped is you'll see this little blue hand pop up here. So that's remote controlled by my device. So you'll notice if I turn my knobs, it'll change these values. So it's auto mapping those and makes it way easier to start doing modulations. So you can either do that manually by going up here to MIDI, or if you have like an MPK Mini or a machine or a launchpad or something like that that auto maps some of those parameters, you kind of figure out the way that it works for each device, but it is an option there. So moving on, this is your CPU load meter. If you click it, it'll essentially turn off Ableton's processing of audio, which is really useful if you're using an ASIO driver and you want to switch back over to YouTube or some other media application so you can actually hear again. It'll unhook ASIO. That's everything in the top bar, so easy peasy.